It had to be you, of course. Well, Merlin the bastard, what are you doing here alone? And where have you been? I didn't answer straight away. I was wondering how much to say. To any other officer I might have told a quick and easy half-truth, but Euther was likely to ride me hard, and for anyone who'd been at a meeting both secret and illegal, Euther was not just any officer. He was dangerous. Not that there was any reason for me to protect Balasius, but I did not owe information or explanation to anyone but Ambrosius. In any case, to steer aside from Euther's anger came naturally. So I met his eyes with what I hoped was an expression of frankness. "My pony went lame, sir, so I left my servant to walk him home. I took my servant's horse to ride back myself." As he opened his mouth to speak, I hoisted the invisible shield that Balasius had put into my hand. "Usually your brother sends for me after supper. I didn't want to keep him waiting." His brows snapped down at my mention of Ambrosius, but all he said was, "Why that way, at this hour? Why not by the road?" "We'd gone some way into the forest when Aster hurt himself. We turned east at the crossways into the logging track. There was a path branching south. It looked a little quicker, so we took it. The moonlight made it easy to see." "Which path?" "I don't know the forest, sir. It climbed the ridge, then went down to a ford about a mile downstream." "Where did you leave the servant?" "Little way along the second path. He wanted to be quite sure it was the right way before he came. He'll be climbing the ridge by now, I should think." I was praying, confusedly but sincerely, to whatever god might be listening, that Cador was not at that moment riding back from town to find me. Euther regarded me, sitting his fidgeting horse as if it did not exist. It was the first time I had realized how like his brother he was, and for the first time, too, I recognized something like power in him, and understood, young as I was, what Ambrosius had told me about his brilliance as a captain. He could judge men to a hair's breadth. I knew he was looking straight through me, scenting a lie, yet not knowing where or why, but wondering, and determined to find out. For once he spoke quite pleasantly, without heat, even gently. "You're lying, aren't you? But why?" "It's quite true, my lord. If you look at the pony when he comes in—" "Oh, yes, that was true. I've no doubt I'll find he's lame. And if I send men back up that path, they'll probably find Cador leaving him home. But what I want to know—" "Not Cador, my lord. Ulfin. Cador had other duties. Balasius sent Ulfin with me." Two of a kind. "My lord?" The voice cracked suddenly with temper. "Don't bandy words with me, you little catamite. You're lying about something, and I want to know what. I can smell a lie a mile off." Then he looked past me, and his voice changed. "What's that in your saddlebag?" A jerk of his head at one of the soldiers flanking me, and a corner of Balasius's robe was showing. The man thrust his hand into the bag and pulled it out. On the soiled and crumpled white, the stains showed dark and unmistakable. I could smell the stale blood, even through the bubbling resin of the torches. Behind Euther, the horses snorted and tossed their heads, scenting it, and the men looked at one another. I saw the torch-bearers eyeing me askance, and the guard beside me muttered something under his breath. "By all the gods below! So that was it! One of them, by Mithras! I should have known! I can smell the holy smoke on you from here! All right, you bastard! You that's so mighty free with my brother's name, so high in his favour! We'll see what he has to say to this. What have you to say for yourself now? There's not much point in denying it, is there?" I lifted my head. Sitting the big mare, I could meet him almost eye to eye. "Deny? I'm denying that I've broken a law, or done anything the Count would not like. Those are the only two things that matter. I'll explain to him, my Lord Euther." "By God, you will! So Ulfin took you there?" "Ulfin had nothing to do with it. I'd already left him. In any case, he's a slave. He does what I bid him. Eustace spurred his horse suddenly, right up to the mare. He leaned forward, gripping the folds of my cloak at the neck, and tightening the grip till he half lifted me from the saddle. His face was thrust close to mine, his armed knee hurting my leg as the horses stamped and sidled together. He spoke through his teeth. "And you do as I bid you. You hear me? Whatever you may be to my brother, you obey me too." He tightened the grip still further. "Do you understand me, Merlin Emrys?" I nodded. He swore as the brooch pin scratched him. He let me go. There was a streak of blood on his hand. I saw his eyes on the brooch. He flicked his fingers to the torch-bearer, and the man pushed nearer, holding the flame high. "He gave you that to wear? The Red Dragon?" Then he stopped short, as his eyes came up to my face. They fixed there, stared, widened. The intense blue seemed to blaze. The grey stallion sidled. He curbed it sharply, so that the foam sprang. Merlin Emrys. My God. I'd not heard him laugh like this before. It was strange. He looked strange. "Well, Merlin Emrys, you'll still have to answer to him for where you've been tonight." He wheeled the horse, flinging over his shoulder to the men. "Bring him along, and see he doesn't fall off. It seems my brother treasures him." The grey horse jumped under the spur, and the troop surged after him. My captors, still holding the brown mare's bridle, pounded after, with me between them. The druid's robe lay trampled and filthy in the dirt, where the troop had ridden over it. I wondered if Belasius would see it, and take warning. Then I forgot him. I had Ambrosius to face. Cadwal was in my room. "Oh, thank the gods you didn't come back after me. I was picked up by Eustace's lot. He's blazing mad. He knows where I went." "I know. I saw it." "What? What do you mean?" "I did ride back for you. I thought you'd had the sense to run for home when you heard that noise, so I went after you. When I saw no sign of you on the way, I thought you must have got a tidy turn of speed out of a mare. The ground was fair smoking under me, I can tell you. Then, when—" "You guessed what was happening? Where Belasius was?" "Aye." He turned his head, as if to spit on the floor, then recollected himself and made the sign against the evil eye. "Well, when I got back here, no sign of you, so I knew you must have gone straight down to see what was going on. High-handed little fool! You might have got yourself killed meddling with that lot." "So might you. But you went back." "What else could I do? You should have heard what I was calling you to. Proper little nuisance was the least of it. Well, I was about half a mile out of the town when I saw him coming. I pulled aside and waited for him to pass. You know that old posting station, the ruined one? I was there. I watched them go by, you at the back under guard. So I guessed he knew. I followed them back to town as close as I dared and cut home through the side streets. I only just got here. He found out then." I nodded, beginning to unfasten my cloak. "Oh, there is going to be the devil to pay, no mistake. How did he find out?" "Belasius had put his robe in my saddle-bag. They found it. They think it was mine." "If they tried it for size, they'd have to think again. But that didn't occur to them. They just dropped it in the mud and rode over it." "About right, too." Cadwal had gone down on one knee to unfasten my sandals. He paused with one in his hand. "Are you trying to tell me Belasius saw you and had words with you?" "Yes. I waited for him. We walked back together to the horses. Alfin's bringing Asta, by the way." He ignored that. He was staring. I thought he'd lost colour. "Usta didn't see Belasius. Belasius dodged in time. He knew they'd heard one horse, so he sent me forward to meet them. Otherwise, I suppose they'd have come in after us both. He must have forgotten I had the robe, or else he chanced on not finding it. Anybody but you, sir, wouldn't have looked.
You should never have gone near Belasius. It's worse than I thought. Here, let me do that. Your hands are cold.
He pulled the dragon brooch off and took my cloak.
You want to watch it, you do. He's a nasty customer. They all are, come to that. Him most of all.
Did you know about him?
Not to say no. I might have guessed. It's right up his street. But what I meant was, they are a nasty lot to tangle with.
Well, he's the arch-druid, or at least head of this sect. He'll carry some weight. Don't look troubled, Caddo. I doubt he's going to harm me, or let anyone else harm me.
Did he threaten you?
Yes, with a curse.
They say these things stick. They say the druids can send a knife after you which will hunt you down for days. All you know about it is the whistling noise in the air behind you before it strikes.
Oh, they say all sorts of things, Caddo. Have I got another tunic that's decent? Did my best one come back from the cleaner? Oh, I should have a bath too before I go to the Count.
He eyed me sideways as he reached for the clothes chest. You, sir, will have gone straight to him. You know that?
I laughed. Of course. I warn you, I shall tell Ambrosius the truth.
All of it?
All of it.
Well, I suppose that's best. If anyone can protect you from them.
Oh, it's not that. It's simply that he ought to know. He has the right. Besides, what have I to hide from him?
I was thinking about the curse. Even Ambrosius might not be able to protect you from that.
Oh, that of a curse.
The gesture I made was not commonly seen in noblemen's houses.
Forget it. Neither you nor I have done wrong, and I refuse to lie to Ambrosius.
Some day I will see you scared, Merlin.
Probably.
Weren't you even scared of Belasius?
Should I be? He won't do me any harm.
I unhooked the belt of my tunic and threw it on the bed. I regarded Caddo.
Would you be afraid? If you knew your own end, Caddo?
Yes, by the dog. Do you?
Sometimes, in snatches. Sometimes I see it. It fills me with fear.
He stood still, looking at me. There was fear in his face. What is it then?
A cave. The crystal cave. Sometimes I think it is death, and at other times it is birth, or a gate to vision, or a dark limbo of sleep. I can't tell. But some day I shall know. Till then I suppose I'm not afraid of much else. I shall come to the cave in the end, as you.
I broke off. As I what? What'll I come to?
I was going to say as you will come to old age.
That is a lie. I saw your eyes. And you are seeing things your eyes go queer. I've noticed it before. The black spreads, it goes kind of blurred, dreaming like. Not soft, no. And your whole look goes cold, like cold iron. As if you neither saw nor cared about what is going on around you. And you talk as though you were just a voice, not a person. Or as if you had gone somewhere else and left your body for something else to speak through. Like a horn being blown through to make the sound carry. I know I've only seen it a couple of times, for a moment. But it's uncanny. It frightens me.
It frightens me too, Caddo.
I had let the green tunic slide from my body to the floor. He was holding out the grey wool robe I wore for a bedgown. I reached absently for it and sat down on the bed's edge. It was trailing over my knees. I was talking to myself rather than Caddo.
It frightens me too. You're right. That's how it feels. As if I were an empty shell with something working through me. I say things, and see things, think things, till that moment I never knew of. But you're wrong to think I don't feel. It hurts me. I think this may be because I can't command whatever speaks through me. I mean, I can't command it yet. But I shall. I know this too. Some day I shall command this part of me that knows and sees, this God. That really will be power. I shall know when what I foretell is human instinct, and when it is God's shadow. And when you spoke of my end, what
was that? I looked up. Oddly enough, it was less easy to lie to Caddo than it had been to Uther. But I haven't seen your death, Caddo. No one's but my own. I was being tactless. I was going to say, as you will come to a foreign grave somewhere. I know this is worse than hell to a Breton, but I think it will happen to you. That is, if you stay as my servant. His look lightened. He grinned. This is power, I thought, when a word of mine can frighten men like this. Oh, I'll do that all right. Even if he hadn't asked me to, I'd stay. You've an easy way with you that makes it a pleasure to look after you. I thought you found me a high-handed little fool and a nuisance besides. Oh, there you are, eh? Well, I'd never have dared say that to anyone else of your class. All you do is laugh, and you twice royal. Twice royal? You can hardly count my grandfather as well as my... I stopped. What stopped me was his face. He had spoken without thought, then, on a quick gasp, had tried to catch the words back into his mouth and unspeak them. He said nothing, just stood there with the soiled tunic in his hand. I stood up slowly, the forgotten bedgown falling to the floor. There was no need for him to speak. I knew. I could not imagine how I had not known before. The moment I stood before Ambrosius in the frosty field and he stared down into the torchlight. He had known, and 100 others must have guessed. I remembered now the sidelong glances of the men, the mutterings of the officers, the deferences of servants, which I had taken for respect for Ambrosius's commands, but which I saw now was deference to Ambrosius's son. The room was still as a cave. Brazier flickered and its light broke and scattered in the bronze mirror against the wall. I looked that way. In the firelit bronze my naked body showed slight and shadowy, an unreal thing of firelight and darkness, shifting as the flames moved. But the face was lit, and in its heavily defined planes of fire and shadow, I saw his face as I had seen it in his room, when he sat over the brazier, waiting for me to be brought to him, waiting for me to come so that he could ask me about Ninian. And here again, the sight had not helped me. Men that have God's sight, I have found, are often human blind. Everybody knows? He nodded. He didn't ask what I meant. It's rumoured. You're very like him sometimes. I think Uther may have guessed tonight. He didn't know before? No. He left before the talk started to go round. That wasn't why he took against you. I'm glad to hear it. What was it, then? Just because I got across him over that business of a standing stone? Oh, that, and other things. Such as? He thought you were the Count's catamite. Ambrosius doesn't go for women much. He doesn't go for boys either, come to that. But one thing Uther cannot understand is a man who is not in and out of bed with someone 7 nights a week. When his brother bothered such a lot with you, had you in his house, set me to look after you and all that, Uther thought that's what must be going on, and he didn't half like it. I see. He did say something like that tonight. I thought it was only because he'd lost his temper. If he'd bothered to look at you or listen to what folks were saying, he would have known fast enough. He knows now. He saw it back there on the road when he saw the dragon brooch the Count had given me. I never thought about it, but of course he would realize. The Count would hardly put the royal cipher on his catamite. He had the torch brought up, had a good look at me. He saw it then. Oh, I think Balasius knows too. Oh, yes, he knows. Why? The way he talked, as if he knew he daren't touch me. That would be why he tried to scare me with the threat of a curse. He's a pretty cool hand, isn't he? He must have been thinking very hard on the way up to the grove. He dared put me quietly out of a way for sacrilege, but he had to stop me talking, hence the curse. And also...
Also what?
Well, don't sound so startled. It was only another guarantee that I would hold my tongue. What? For goodness sake!
I shrugged and realized I was still naked. I reached for the bedgown.
He said he'd take me with him to the sanctuary. I think he'd like to make a druid of me.
He said that? I was getting familiar with Cadol's sign to avert the evil eye.
What would you do?
I'll go with him. Once, anyway.
Don't look like that, Cadol. There's not a cat's chance in the fire I shall want to go more than once. But there is nothing in this world that I am not ready to see and learn, and no God that I am not ready to approach in his own fashion. I told you that truth is the shadow of God. If I am to use it, I must know who he is. Do you understand me?
How could I? What God are you talking about?
I think there's only one. Oh, there are gods everywhere, in the hollow hills, in the wind and the sea, in the very grass we walk on, in the air we breathe, in the blood-stained shadows where men like Balasius wait for them. But I believe there must be one who is God himself, like the great sea, and all the rest of us, small gods and men and all, like rivers, we come to him in the end. Is the bath ready?
20 minutes later, in a dark blue tunic clipped at the shoulder by the dragon brooch, I went to see my father. Book 3. The Wolf. I was 5 years with Ambrosius in Brittany. Looking back now, I see that much of what happened has been changed in my memory, like a smashed mosaic, which is mended in later years by a man who's almost forgotten the first picture. Certain things come back to me plain, in all their colours and details. Others, perhaps more important, come hazy, as if the picture had been dusted over by what has happened since. Death, sorrow, changes of the heart. Places I always remember well, some of them so clearly that I feel even now as if I could walk into them, and that if I had the strength to concentrate, and the power that once fitted me like a robe, I might even now rebuild them, here in the darkness, as I rebuilt the Giant's Dance for Ambrosius all those years ago. Places are clear, and ideas, which came to me so new and shining then, but not always the people. Sometimes now, as I search my memory, I wonder if here and there I have confused them one with another, Balasius with Galapus, Cadol with Cerdic, the Breton officer whose name I forget now, with my grandfather's captain in Maradunum, who once tried to make me into the kind of swordsman that he thought even a bastard prince should want to be. But as I write of Ambrosius, it is as if he were here with me now, lit against this darkness, as the man with the cap was lit on that first frost-enchanted night in Brittany. Even without my robe of power, I can conjure up against the darkness his eyes, steady, under frowning brows, the heavy lines of his body, the face which seems so young to me now, engraved into hardness by the devouring, goading will that had kept his eyes turned westward to his closed kingdom for the 20-odd years it took him to grow from child to comes and build, against all the odds of poverty and weakness, the striking force that grew with him, waiting for the time. It is harder to write of Uther, or rather it is hard to write of Uther as if he were in the past, part of a story that has been over many years. Even more vividly than Ambrosius, he is here with me, not here in the darkness. It is the part of me that was Mervyn that is in here in the darkness. The part that was Uther is out there, in the sunlight, keeping the coasts of Britain whole, following the design I made for him, the design that Galapus showed me on a summer's day in Wales. But there, of course, it is no longer Uther of whom I write. It is the man who was the sum of us, who was all of us, Ambrosius who made me, Uther who worked with me, myself who used him, as I used every man who came to my hand, to make Arthur for Britain. From time to time news came to me from Britain,
and occasionally, with it, through Gorlois of Cornwall, news of my home. It seemed that after my grandfather's death, Camlac had not immediately deserted the old alliance of his kinsman Vortigern. He had to feel himself more secure before he would dare break away to support the young men's party, as Vortimer's faction was called. Indeed, Vortimer himself had stopped short of open rebellion. But it seemed clear that this must come eventually. King Vortigern was back between the landslide and the flood. If he was to stay king of the British, he must call on his Saxon wife's countrymen for help, and the Saxon mercenaries year by year increased their demands, till the country was split and bleeding under what men openly called the Saxon Terror. And, in the West especially, where men were still free, rebellion only waited for a leader of leaders. And so desperate was Vortigern's situation becoming, that he was forced, against his better judgment, to entrust the armed forces in the West more and more to Vortimer and his brothers, whose blood at least carried none of the Saxon taint. Of my mother there was no news, except that she was safe in St. Peter's. Ambrosius sent no message to her. If it came to her ears that a certain Merlinus Ambrosius was now with the Count of Brittany, she would know what to think. But a letter or message direct from the king's enemy would endanger her unnecessarily. She would know, said Ambrosius, soon enough. In fact, it was 5 years before the break came, and the time went by like a tide race. With the possibility of an opening developing in Wales and Cornwall, Ambrosius's preparations accelerated. If the men of the West wanted a leader, he had every intention that it should be, not Vortimer, but himself. He would bide his time and let Vortimer be the wedge, but he and Uther would be the hammer that drove after it into the crack. Meanwhile, hope in Less Britain ran high. Offers of troops and alliances poured in. The countryside shook to the tramp of horses and marching feet, and the streets where engineers and armourers rang far into the night as men redoubled their efforts to make 2 weapons in the time that before it had taken to make 1. Now at last the break was coming, and when it came Ambrosius must be ready, and with no chance of failure. One does not wait half a lifetime gathering the material to make a killing spear, and then lose it at random in the dark. Not only men and materials, but time and spirit and the very wind of heaven must be right for him, and the gods themselves must open the gate. And for this, he said, they had sent me to him. It was my coming, just at such a time, with words of victory, and full of a vision of the unconquered God, which persuaded him, and, even more importantly, the soldiers with him, that the time was at last approaching when he could strike with the certainty of victory. So, I found to my fear, he rated me. Be sure I had never asked him again how he intended to use me. He made it clear enough, and between pride and fear and longing I fought to learn all that I could be taught, and to open myself of a power which was all I could give him. If he had wanted a prophet ready to hand, he must have been disappointed. I saw nothing of importance during this time. Knowledge, I suppose, blocked the gates of vision, but this was the time for knowledge. I studied with Belasius till I outran him, learning, as he had never done, how to apply the calculations which were to him as much a form of art as songs were to me. Even songs, indeed, I was to use. I spent long hours in the streets of the engineers, and had frequently to be dragged by a grumbling cattle from some oily piece of practical work which unfitted me, as he said, for any company but a bath slave's. I wrote down, too, all I could remember of Galapas's medical teaching, and added practical experience by helping the army doctors whenever I could. I had the freedom of the camp and the town, and with Ambrosius's name to back me, I took to this freedom like a hungry young wolf to his first full meal. I learned all the time from every man or woman I met. I looked, as I had promised, in the light and the dark, at the sunshine and the stale pool. I went with Ambrosius to the shrine of Mithras below the farmstead, and with Belasius to the gatherings in the forest. I was even allowed to sit silently at meetings between the Count and his captains, though nobody pretended that I would be of much use in the field, unless, said Uther once, half amused, half malicious, he is to stand above us like Joshua, holding the sun back, to give us more time to do the real work. Though joking apart, he might do worse. The men seemed to think of him as something halfway between a courier of Mithras and a splinter of the true cross, saving your presence, brother, and I'm damned certain he'd be more use stuck up on a hill like a lucky charm, where we can see him, than down in the field, where he wouldn't last 5 minutes.
Yes, he had more to say at the age of 16, when I stopped the daily sword practice which gave a man the minimum training in self-defence. But my father merely laughed and said nothing. I think he knew, though as yet I did not, that I had my own kind of protection. So I learned from everyone. The old women who gathered plants and cobwebs and seaweeds for healing, the travelling pedlars and quack healers, the horse doctors, the soothsayers, the priests. I listened to the soldiers talk outside the taverns, and the officers talk in my father's house, and the boys talk in the streets. There was one thing about which I learned nothing. By the time I left Brittany at 17, I was still ignorant of women. When I thought about them, which happened often enough, I told myself I had no time, that there was a lifetime still ahead of me for such things, and that now I had work to do which mattered more. But I suppose the plain truth is that I was afraid of them. So I lost my desires in work, and indeed I believe now that the fear came from the god. So I waited and minded my own business, which, as I saw it then, was to be fit to serve my father. One day I was in Tremorinus's workshop. Tremorinus, the master engineer, was a pleasant man, and he allowed me to learn all I could from him. He gave me space in the workshops and material to experiment with. This particular day I remember how, when he came to the workshop and saw me busy over a model in my corner bench, he came to have a look at it. When he saw what I was doing, he laughed. "I'd have thought there were plenty of those around without troubling to put up any more." I was interested to see how they got them there. I tilted the scale model of a standing stone back into place. He looked surprised. I knew why. He had lived in West Britain all his life, and the landscape there is so seamed with the stones that men do not see them any more. One walks daily through a forest of stone. To most men it seems dead stone, but not to me. To me they still said something, and I had to find out what. But I did not tell Tremorinus this. I added merely, I was trying to work it to scale. "Well, I can tell you something straight away. That's been tried, and it doesn't work." He was looking at the pulley I had rigged to lift the model. "That might do for the uprights, but only the lighter ones. It doesn't work at all for the capstones." No, I'd found that out. But I'd had an idea. I was going to tackle it another way. "You're wasting your time. Let's see you get down to something practical, something we need and can use. Now, that idea of yours for a light mobile crane, that was worth developing." A few minutes later he was called away. I dismantled the model and sat down to my new calculations. I had not told Tremorinus about them. He had more important things to worry about. And in any case he would have laughed if I told him that I had learnt from a poet how to lift the standing stones. It had happened this way. One day, about a week before this, as I walked by the water that guarded the town walls, I heard a man singing. The voice was old and wavering and hoarse with overuse, the voice of a professional singer who has strained it above the noise of the crowd, and through singing with the winter cold in his throat. What caught my attention was neither the voice nor the tune, which could hardly be picked out, but the sound of my own name. "Merlin, Merlin, where art thou going?" He was sitting by the bridge with a bowl for begging. I saw he was blind, but the remains of his voice were true, and he made no gesture with his bowl as he heard me stop near him. But he sat as one sits at a harp, head bent, listening to what the strings say, with fingers stirring as if they felt the notes. He had sung, I would judge, in kings' halls. "Merlin, Merlin, where art thou going, so early in the day with thy black dog? I have been searching for the egg, the red egg of the sea serpent, which lies in the shore, in the hollow stone. And I go to gather cresses in the meadow, the green cress and the golden grasses, the golden moss that gives sleep, and the mistletoe high on the oak, the druid's bough, that grows deep in the woods by the running water. Merlin, Merlin, come back from the wood and the fountain. Leave the oak and the golden grasses, leave the cress in the water meadow, and the red egg of the sea serpent. Leave it in the foam by the hollow stone. Merlin, Merlin, leave thy seeking. There is no diviner but God." Nowadays, this song is as well known as the one of Mary the Maiden, or the King and the Grey Seal, but it was the first time I had heard it. When he knew who it was who had stopped to listen, he seemed pleased that I should sit beside him on the bank and ask questions. I remember that on the first morning we talked mostly of the song, then of himself. I found he had been as a young man in Mona, the Druid's Isle, and he knew Caran Vaughan, and he had worked there on Snowdon. It was in the Druid's Isle that he had lost his sight, and he never told me how.
But when I told him that the seaweeds and cresses that I hunted along the shore were only plants for healing, not for magic, he smiled, and sang a verse I had heard my mother sing, which, he said, would be a shield. Against what he did not say, nor did I ask. I put money into his bowl, which he accepted with dignity, but when I promised to find a harp for him, he went silent, staring with those empty eye sockets, and I could see he did not believe me. And I brought the harp next day. My father was generous, and I had no need even to tell him what the money was for. When I put the harp into the old singer's hands, he wept, and took my hands and kissed them. After that, right up to the time I left Lesbritton, I often sought him out. He had travelled widely in lands as far apart as Ireland and Africa. He taught me songs from every country, Italy and Gaul and the White North, and older songs from the East, strange, wandering tunes which had come westward, he said, from the islands of the East, with the men of old who had raised the standing stones, and they spoke of laws long forgotten except in song. I do not think he himself thought of them as anything but songs of old magic, poets' tales. But the more I thought about them, the more clearly they spoke to me of men who had really lived, and work they had really done. When they raised the great stones to mark the sun and moon, and build for their gods and the giant kings of old, it had been something real, not magic. I said something once more about this to Tremornis, who was kindly as well as clever, and who managed usually to find time for me. But he laughed and put it aside, so I said no more. Ambrosius's technicians had more than enough to think about in those days, without helping a boy to work out a set of calculations of no practical use in the coming invasion, so I let it be. It was in the spring of my 18th year that the news came finally from Britain. Through January and February, winter had closed the seaways, and it was not till early March, taking advantage of the cold, still weather before the gales began, that a small trading boat put into port, and Ambrosius got news. Stirring news it was, literally so, for within a few hours of its coming, the Count's messengers were riding north and east to gather in his allies at last and quickly, for the news was late. It appeared that Vortimer had finally, some time before, broken with his father and the Saxon queen. Tired of petitioning the High King to break with his Saxon allies and protect his own people from them, several of the British leaders, among them the men of the West, had persuaded Vortimer to take matters into his own hands at last, and had risen with him. They had declared him king, and rallied to his banner against the Saxons, whom they had succeeded in driving back south and eastwards, till they took refuge with their longships in the Isle of Thanet. Even there Vortimer pursued them, and through the last days of autumn and the beginning of winter had beleaguered them there, until they pleaded only to be allowed to depart in peace, packed up their goods, and went back to Germany, leaving their women and children behind them. But Vortimer's victorious kingship did not last long. It was not clear exactly what had happened, but the rumour was that he had died of poison, treacherously administered by a familiar of the Queen. Whatever the truth of the matter, he was dead, and Vortigern his father was once more in command. Almost his first act had been, and again the blame was imputed to his wife, to send yet again the Hengist and his Saxons to return to Britain. With a small force, he had said, nothing but a mobile peacekeeping force to help him impose order and pull together the divided kingdom. In fact, the Saxons had promised 300,000 men. So rumour said, and though it was to be supposed that rumour lied, it was certain at any rate that Hengist planned to come with a considerable force. There was also a fragment of news from Maradunum. The messenger was no spy of Ambrosius. The news we got was, as it were, only the larger rumours, but these were bad enough. It seemed that my uncle Camlac, together with all his nobles, my grandfather's men, the men that I knew, had risen with Vortimer and fought beside him in the 4 pitched battles against the Saxons. In the second, at Epsford, Camlac had been killed, along with Vortimer's brother, Cadogan. What concerned me more was that after Vortimer's death, reprisals had been levelled at the men who had fought with him. Vortigern had annexed Camlac's kingdom to join his own lands of Gwent, and wanting hostages, had repeated his action 25 years earlier, and had taken Camlac's children, one still an infant, and lodged them in the care of Queen Rowena.
We had no means of knowing if they were still alive, nor did we know if Alwyn's son, who had met the same fate, had survived. It seemed unlikely. Of my mother there was no news. 2 days after the news came, the spring gales began. Once more the seas were locked against us and against news. But this hardly mattered. Indeed, it worked both ways. If we could get no news from Britain, they could have none of us, and of the final accelerated preparations for the invasion of Western Britain, for it was certain that the time had now come. It was not only a case of marching to the relief of Wales and Cornwall, but if there were to be any men left to rally to the Red Dragon would have to fight for his crown this coming year. "You will go back with the first boat," said Ambrosius to me, but without looking up from a map which was spread on the table in front of him. I was standing over by the window. Even with the shutters closed and curtains drawn, I could hear the wind, and beside me the curtains stirred in the draught. "Yes, sir." I crossed to the table. I saw his finger was pointing to the map. "I'm to go to Maradunham?" "Yes. You'll take the first westbound boat, and make your way home from wherever it docks. You're to go straight up to Galapagos and get what news there is from him. I doubt you'll be recognized in the town, but take no risks. Galapagos is safe. You can make him your base." "There was no word from Cornwall, then?" "Nothing, except a rumour that Gorlois is with Vortigern." "With Vortigern? Then he didn't rise with Vortimer?" "No. As far as my information goes, no." "You think he's trimming, then?" "Yes, perhaps. I find it hard to believe. It may mean nothing. I understand he has married a young wife. It may only be that he kept within walls all winter to keep her warm, or when he saw what had happened to Vortimer, preferred to serve my cause by staying safe and apparently loyal to the High King. But until I know, I cannot send you to him directly. He may be watched, so you are to go to Galapagos for news of Wales. I am told Vortigern's holed up there somewhere, while the length of eastern Britain lies open to Hengist. I'll have to smoke the old wolf out first, then weld the west against the Saxons. But it'll have to be fast. And I want Carlion." He looked up then. "I'm sending your old friend with you, Marek. You can send word back by him. Let us hope you find all well. You'll want news yourself, I dare say." "It can wait." He said nothing to that, but raised his brows at me, and then he turned back to the map. "Well, sit down, and I will brief you myself. Let us hope you can get away soon." I indicated the swaying curtains. "I shall be sick all the way." He looked up from the map and laughed. "By Mithras, I hadn't thought of that. Do you suppose I shall be too? What a damned undignified way to go back to one's home." "To one's kingdom," I said. I crossed in early April, and on the same ship as before, but the crossing could not have been more different. This was not Merlin, the runaway, but Merlinus, a well-dressed young Roman with money in his pockets and servants in attendance. Where Mervyn had been locked naked in the hold, Merlinus had a comfortable cabin, and marked deference paid him by the captain. Cadel, of course, was one of my servants, and the other, to my own amusement, though not his, was Marek. Hanno was dead, having overreached himself, I gathered, in a little matter of blackmail. Naturally, I carried no outward sign of my connection with Ambrosius, but nothing would part me from the brooch he had given me. I wore this clipped inside the shoulder of my tunic. It was doubtful whether anyone would have recognized me in the runaway of 5 years ago, and certainly the captain gave no sign, but I held myself aloof, and was careful to speak nothing but Breton. As luck would have it, the boat was going straight to the mouth of the Tui, and would anchor at Maradunham. But it had been arranged that Cadel and I were to be put off by boat as soon as the trader arrived in the estuary.
It was, in fact, my previous journey in reverse, but in the most important respect there was no difference. I was sick all the way. The fact that this time I had a comfortable bunk and Cadell to look after me, instead of sacks and a bucket in the hold, made not the slightest difference to me. As soon as the ship nosed itself out of a small sea and met the windy April weather at the bay, I left my brave stance in the bows and went below and lay down. We had, what they tell me, was a fair wind, and we crept into the estuary and dropped anchor just before dawn, 10 days before the Ides of April. It was a still dawn, misty and cold. It was very quiet. The tide was just on the turn, beginning to flow up the estuary, and as our boat left the ship's side, the only sound was the hiss and chuckle of water along the sides, and the soft splash of the paddles. Far away, faint and metallic, I could hear cocks crowing. Somewhere beyond the mist, lambs were crying, answered by the deeper bleatings of the sheep. The air smelt soft, clear and salty, and in some curious way of home. We kept well out to the centre of the stream, and the mist hid us from the banks. If we spoke at all, it was in whispers. Once, when a dog barked from the bank, we heard a man speak to it almost as clearly as if he had been in the boat with us. This was sufficient warning, and we kept our voices down. It was a strong spring tide, and took us fast. This was as well, for we had made anchor later than we should, and the light was growing. I saw the sailors who rowed glance anxiously upwards and lengthen their stroke. I leaned forward, straining my eyes for a glimpse of a bank I could recognise. Cadell said in my ear, "Are you glad to be back?" "That depends on what we find." "Mithras, but I'm hungry." "That's not surprising. What are you looking for?" "There should be a bay, white sand with a stream coming down through trees. A ridge behind it with a crest of pines. We could put in there." He nodded. The plan was that Cadell and I should be landed on the side of the estuary away from Marydunum, at a point I knew from which we could make our way unseen to join the road from the south. We would be travellers from Cornwall. I would do the talking, but Cadell's accent would pass with any but a native Cornishman. I had with me some pots of salve and a small chest of medicines, and if challenged, could pass as a travelling doctor, a disguise that would serve me as a pass to more or less anywhere I wanted to go. Marek was still on board. He would go in with the trader, and disembark as usual at the wharf. He would try to find his old contacts in the town, and pick up what news he could. Cadell would go with me to the cave of Galapus, and act as connecting file with Marek to pass over what information I got. The ship was to lie for 3 days in the Tui. When she sailed, Marek would take the news back with her. Whether I and Cadell would be with him would depend on what we found. Neither my father nor I forgot that Camlach's part in the rebellion against Vortigern must have been through Marydunum like a fox through a henrun, and maybe his Saxons with him. My first duty was to get news of Vortigern and send it back, and my second to find my mother and see she was safe. It was good to be on land again. Not dry land, for the grass at the head of the ridge was long and soaking, but I felt light and excited as the boat vanished under the mist, and Cadell and I left the shore and made our way inland towards the road. I don't know what I expected to find in Marydunum. I don't even know that I cared overmuch. It was not the homecoming that made my spirits lift, but the fact that at last I had a job to do for Ambrosius. If I could not yet do a prophet's work for him, at least I could do a man's work, and then a son's. I believe that all the time I was half hoping that I would be asked to die for him. I was very young. We reached the bridge without incident, and luck was with us there, for we fell in with a horse trader who had a couple of nags in hand which he hoped to sell in the town. I bought one of them from him, haggling just enough to prevent suspicion. He was pleased enough with the price to throw in a rather worn saddle. By the time the transaction was finished, it was full light, and there were 1 or 2 people about. But no one gave us more than a cursory glance, except for one fellow who, apparently recognizing the horse, grinned and said, to Cadell rather than me, "Were you planning to go far, mate?" I pretended not to hear, but from a corner of my eye saw Cadell spread his hands and shrug, and turn his eyes up in my direction. The look said all too plainly, "I only follow where he goes, and he's crazy anyway." Presently the towpath was empty. Cadell came up alongside and hooked a hand through the neck strap. "He's right, you know. That old screw won't get you very far. How far is it, anyway?" "It's probably not nearly as far as I remember. 6 miles at the outside." "Uphill most of the way, you said?" "Well, I can always walk. He's not so much of a wreck as he looks, you know. There's not much wrong with him that a few good feeds won't put right."
"Then at least you won't have wasted your money. What are you looking for over that wall?"
"That's where I used to live."
We were passing my grandfather's house. It looked very little changed. From the cob's back I could see just over the wall to the terrace where the quince tree grew, its brilliant flame-coloured blossoms opening in the morning sun. And there was the garden where Camlac had given me the poisoned apricot. And there the gate where I had run in tears. The cob plodded on. Here was the orchard, the apple trees already swelling with buds, the grass springing rough and green round the little terrace where Moravik would sit and spin while I played at her feet. And here now was the place I had jumped over the wall the night I ran away. Here was the leaning apple tree where I had left Asta tethered. The wall was broken. I could see in across the rough grass where I had run that night from my room where Curdic's body lay on its funeral pyre. I pulled the cob to a halt and craned to see further. I must have made a clean sweep that night. The buildings were all gone. My room, and along with it 2 sides of the outer court. Stables, I saw, were the same. The fire had not reached them then. The 2 sides of the colonnade that had been destroyed had been rebuilt in a modern style that seemed to be no relation at all to the rest. Big, rough stones, crude building, square pillars holding up a timber roof, and square, deep windows. It was ugly, looked comfortless. Its only virtue was that it was weatherproof. You might as well, I thought, settling back in the saddle and putting the cob in motion, live in a cave. What are you grinning at? Only at how Roman I've become. It's funny, my own home isn't here any more, and to be honest, I don't think it's in Less Britain either. Well, where is your home then? I don't know. Where the Count is, that's for sure. That will be the sort of place, I suppose, for the time being. I nodded towards the walls of the old Roman barracks behind the palace. They were in ruins, and the place was deserted. So much the better, I thought. At least it didn't look as if Ambrosius would have to fight for it. Give Uther 24 hours and the place would be as good as new. And here was St. Peter's, apparently untouched, showing no sign either of fire or spear. You know something? I said to Cadell as we left the shadow of the nunnery wall and headed along the path towards the mill. I suppose if I have anywhere I can call a home, it's the cave of Galapus. Well, that doesn't sound all that Roman to me. Give me a good tavern any day, and a decent bed and some mutton to eat, and you can keep all the caves there are. Even with this sorry horse, the way seemed shorter than I remembered it. Soon we reached the mill, and turned up across the road and into the valley. Time fell away. It seemed only yesterday that I came up this same valley in the sunshine, with the wind stirring Asta's grey mane. Not even Asta's, for there, under the same thorn tree, was surely the same half-wit boy, watching the same sheep as on my very first ride. As we reached the fork in the path, I found myself watching for the ring-dove, but the hillside was still, except for the rabbits scuttering among the young bracken. Whether the cob sensed the end of his journey, or whether he merely liked the feel of grass under his feet and a light weight on his back, he seemed to quicken his step. Ahead of me now I could see the shoulder of the hill, beyond which lay the cave. I drew rein by the hawthorn grove. Here we are. It's up there above the cliff. I slipped out of the saddle and handed the reins to Cadell. Stay here and wait for me. You can come up in an hour. And don't be alarmed if you see what you think is smoke. It's only bats coming out of the cave. I'd almost forgotten Cadell's sign against the evil eye. He made it now. I laughed and left him. Before I had climbed around the little crag to the lawn in front of the cave, I knew. Call it foresight. There was no sign. Silence, of course,
Then there usually was silence as I approached the cave. But this silence was different. It was only after some moments I realized what it was. I could no longer hear the trickle of the spring. I mounted to the top of a path and came out onto the sward, and I saw. There was no need to go to the cave to know he was not there, and never would be again. On the flat grass in front of the cave were a scatter of debris. I went closer. It had been done not so long ago. There had been a fire here, a fire quenched by rain before everything could be properly destroyed. There was a pile of sodden rubbish, half-charred wood, rags, parchment, gone again to pulp, with the blackened edges still showing. I turned the nearest piece of scorched wood over with my foot. From the carving on it I knew what it was. The chest that had held his books, and the parchment. They were all that remained of the books themselves. I suppose there was other stuff of his among the wreck of rubbish. I didn't look further. If the books had gone, I knew everything else would have gone too, and Galapus with them. I went slowly towards the mouth of the cave. I paused by the spring. I could see why there was no sound now. Someone had filled in the basin with stones and earth, and more wreckage was thrown out of the cave. Through it all the water welled, still, sluggishly, oozing in silence over the stone lip and down to make a muddy morass of the turf. I thought I could see the skeleton of a bat, picked clean by the water. Strangely enough, the torch was still on the ledge, high beside the mouth of the cave, and it was dry. There was no flint of iron, but I made fire, and, holding the torch before me, went inside slowly. I think my flesh was shivering, as if a cold wind blew out of the cave, and went by me. I knew what I would find. The place was stripped. Everything had been thrown out to burn. Everything, that is, except the bronze mirror. This, of course, would not burn, but I suppose it had been too heavy to be looted. It had been wrenched from the wall and stood propped against the side of the cave, tilted at a drunken angle. Nothing else, not even a stir and whisper from the bats in the roof. The place echoed with emptiness. I lifted the torch high and looked up towards the crystal cave. It was not there. I believe that for a couple of pulses of torchlight I thought he'd managed to conceal me in a cave, and was in hiding. Then I saw. The gap into the crystal cave was still there, but chance, call it what you will, had rendered it invisible, except to those who knew. Because the bronze mirror had fallen, instead of directing its light towards the gap, it directed darkness. Its light was beamed and concentrated on a projection of rock which cast clear across the mouth of a crystal cave a black wedge of shadow. To anyone intent only on pillage and destruction, the gap would be hardly visible at all. "Galapus? Galapus?" I tried to sound out in the emptiness. There was the faintest whisper from the crystal cave, a ghostly sweet humming like the inside music I had once listened to in the night. But nothing human. I had not expected it. But still I climbed up to the ledge, knelt down and peered in. The torchlight caught the crystals and threw the shadow of my harp trembling clear around the lighted globe. The harp, undamaged, still stood in the centre of the cave. Nothing else except the whisper dying around the glittering walls. There must be visions there in the flash and counter-flash of light, but I knew I would not be open to them. I put a hand down to the rock and vaulted, torch streaming, back to the floor of the cave. As I passed the tilted mirror, I caught a glimpse of a tall youth running in a swirl of flame and smoke. His face looked pale, the eyes black and enormous. I ran out onto the grass. I had forgotten the torch, which flamed and streamed behind me. I ran to the edge of a cliff and cupped a hand to my mouth to call cattle. But then a sound from behind me made me whip round and look upwards. It was a very normal sound. A pair of ravens and a carrion crow had risen from the hill and were scolding at me. Slowly this time I climbed the path that led up past the spring and out to the hillside above the cave. The ravens went higher, barking. 2 more crows made off low across the young bracken. There was a couple still busy on something lying among the flowering blackthorn. I whirled the torch and flung it streaming to scatter them, and I ran forward. There was no telling how long he'd been dead. The bones were picked almost clean. but I knew him by the discoloured brown rags that flapped under the skeleton, and the one old broken sandal which lay flung near by among the April daisies. One of the hands had fallen from a wrist, and the clean brittle bones lay near my foot. I could see where the little finger had been broken and had been set crookedly. Already through the bare rib cage the April grass was springing. The air blew clean and sunlit, smelling of flowering gorse. The torch had been stubbed out in the fresh grass. I stooped and picked it up. I should not have thrown it at them. His birds had given him a seemly way going. A step behind brought me round. I saw the birds go up. Oh, Galapagos? Yes. I saw the mess down by the cave, I guessed. I hadn't realized I'd been here so long. Leave this to me. I'll get him buried. You go down and wait where we left the horse. I can maybe find some sort of tool down yonder, or I could come back. No. Let him lie in peace under the thorn. We'll build the hill over him and let it take him in. And we'll do it together, Cadwal. There were stones in plenty to pile over him for a barrow, and we cut sods with our dagger to turf it over. By the end of summer the bracken and foxgloves and young grasses would have grown right over and shrouded him. So we left him. As we went downhill again past the cave, I thought of the last time I had gone this way. I had been weeping then, I remembered, for Cerdick's death, for my mother's loss and Galapagos, for who knew with what foreknowledge of the future. You will see me again, he had said. I promise you that. Well, I had seen him, and some day no doubt his other promise would come true in its own fashion. I shivered and caught Cadwal's quick look. I hope you had the sense to bring a flask with you, I said curtly. I need a drink. Cadwal had brought more than a flask with him. He had brought food, salt mutton and bread, and last season's olives in a bottle with their own oil. We sat in the lee of a wood and ate, while the cob grazed near us, and below, in the distance, the placid curves of a river glimmered through the April green of the fields and the young wooded hills. The mist had cleared. It was a beautiful day. Well, what is to do now? We go to see my mother, if she's still there, of course. Then, with a savagery that broke through me so suddenly that I had hardly known it was there, by Mithras, I'd give a lot to know who did that up yonder. Why, who would it be but Vortigern? Vortimer, Pescentius, anyone. When a man is wise and gentle and good, it seems to me that every man's hand is against him. Galapagos could have been murdered by an outlaw for food, or a herdsman for shelter, or a passing soldier for a drink of water. It was no murder. What then? I meant it was done by more than one. Men in a pack are worse than lone ones. I'd guess it was Vortigern's men, on their way up from the town. Well, you're probably right, and I shall find out. Do you think you'll get to see your mother? I can try. Have you any messages for her? It was, I suppose, the measure of my relationship with Cadwal that he dared ask the question, and I answered him quite simply. If you mean, did Ambrosius tell me to tell her anything? No, he left it to me. What I do tell her depends entirely on what has happened since I left. I shall talk to her first, and judge how much to tell her after that. Don't forget I haven't seen her for a long time. People change. I mean, loyalties change. Look at mine. When I last saw her, I was only a child. I have only a child's memories. For all I know, I misunderstood her utterly. The way she thought, the things she wanted. Her loyalties may lie elsewhere. Not just the church, but the way she feels about Ambrosius. The gods know there'd be no blame to her if she had changed. She owed Ambrosius nothing. She took good care that she did not. He said thoughtfully, his eyes on the green distance, threading by the glinting river. The nunnery hadn't been touched. Exactly. Whatever had happened to the rest of the town, Vortigern let St. Peter's be. So you see I have to find out who is in which camp before I give any messages. What she hasn't known for all these years, it won't hurt her to go on not knowing for as many more days. Whatever happens, with Ambrosius coming so soon, I must not take the risk of telling her too much. He began to pack away the remains of the meal while I sat chin on hand, thinking, my eyes on the bright distance. I added, slowly, it's simple enough to find out where Vortigern is now, and if Hengist has landed already, and with how many men. Marek will probably find it out without too much trouble. But there were other soundings the Count wanted me to make, things that they will hardly know about in the nunnery. So that now Galapus is dead, I shall have to try elsewhere. We'll wait here till dark, then we shall go down to St. Peter's. My mother will be able to tell me who I can still go to in safety. Whatever king she favours, she's not likely to give me away. That's true enough. Well, let us hope that they will let her see you. If she knows who is asking for her, I imagine it will take more than a word from the abbess to stop her seeing me. Don't forget she's still a king's daughter. I lay back on the warm grass, my hands behind my head. Even if I am not yet a king's son. But king's son or no, there was no getting into the nunnery. I had been right in thinking there had been no damage done here. The high walls loomed unbroken and unscarred, and the gates were new and solid of oak, hinged and bolted with iron. They were fast shut. Nor, mercifully, did any welcoming torch burn outside. The narrow street was empty and unlit in the early dusk. At our urgent summons, a small square window in the gate opened, and an eye was applied to the grille. "We're travellers from Cornwall," I said softly. "I must have word with the Lady Ninian." "Lady who?" It was the flat, toneless voice of the deaf. Wondering irritably why a deaf portress should be put at the gate, I raised my voice a little, closer to the grille. "The Lady Ninian. I don't know what she calls herself now, but she was sister of the late king. Is she with you still?" "Aye, but she'll see nobody. Is it a letter you have she can read?" "No, I must have speech with her. Please go and take word to her. Tell her it's one of the family." "Her family?" I thought I saw a flicker of interest in the eyes. "They're most of 'em dead and gone. Do you not get news in Cornwall? Her brother the king died in battle last year, and the children, they've all gone to Vortigern. Her own son has been dead these 5 years. "Yes, I know that. I'm not her brother's family, and I'm as loyal as she is to the High King. Go and tell her that. And look, take this for your devotions." A pouch passed through the grille and was grabbed in a quick monkey snatch. "I'll take a message for you. Give me your name. I don't say she'll see you, mind, but I will take your name." "My name?" I hesitated. "My name is Emrys. She knew me once. Tell her that. And hurry. We'll wait here." It was barely 10 minutes before I heard the steps coming back. For a moment I thought it might be my mother, but it was the same old eyes that peered through the grille, the same clawed hand laying hold of the bars. "She'll see you. No, not now, young master. You can't come in. Nor she can't come out neither till prayers is over. Then she'll meet you on the river walk, she says. There's another gate in the wall there, but not to let anyone see you." "Very well. We'll be careful." I could see the whites of the eyes turning as she tried to see me in the shadows. "Knew you, she did? Straight away? Emrys, eh? Well, don't worry. I won't say aught. These be troubled times. The least said the better, no matter what about." "What time are you to be there?" asked Caddo. "It'll be an hour after moonrise, I would say. We'll hear the bell." There was a mist rising again from the river. This would help, I thought. We went quietly down the lane which skirted the nunnery walls. It led away from the streets, down towards the towpath. "What now? It's 2 hours yet till moonrise, and by the look of the night we'll be lucky if we ever see a moon at all. You'll not risk going into the town. No, but there's no sense in waiting about in the drizzle. We'll find a place out of the wet where we can hear the bell. Let's go this way. The stable-yard gate was locked. I wasted no time on it, but led the way to the orchard wall. No lights showed in the palace. We scrambled over where the wall was broken, and walked up through the damp grass of the orchard and into grandfather's garden. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and growing things. Mint and sweetbriar, moss, young leaves heavy with wet. Last year's ungathered fruit squelched under our feet. Behind us the gate creaked emptily. The colonnades were empty, the doors shut, the shutters fastened close over the windows. The place was all darkness and echoes and the scuttle of rats. But there was no damage that I could see. I suppose when Vortigern took the town he had meant to keep the house for himself, and had somehow persuaded or forced his Saxons to bypass it in their looting, as, from fear of the bishops, he had forced them to bypass St. Peter's. Well, so much the better for us. We would at least have a dry and comfortable wait. My time with Tremorinus had been wasted indeed, if I could not have picked every lock in the place. I was just saying as much to Caddo, when suddenly round the corner of the house, treading softly as a cat on the mossy flagstones, came a young man walking fast. He stopped dead at the sight of us, and I saw his hand flash down to his hip. And even while Caddo's weapon hissed free of its sheath in reply, the young man peered, stared, and then exclaimed, "Merlin! By the holy oak!" For a moment I genuinely did not recognize him, which was understandable, since he was not much older than myself and had changed as much in 5 years. Then unmistakably I saw who he was. Broad shoulders, thrusting jaw, hair that even in the twilight showed red. Dinius, who had been prince and king's son when I was a nameless bastard. Dinius, my cousin, who would not even recognize that much of a tie with me, but who had claimed the title of prince for himself, and been allowed to get away with it. He could hardly now be taken for a prince. Even in the fading light I could see that he was dressed, not poorly, but in clothes that a merchant might have worn, and he had only one jewel, an arm ring of copper. His belt was of plain leather, his hoard silk plain also, and his cloak, though of good stuff, was stained and frayed at the edge. About his whole person was an undefinable air of seediness, which comes from relentless calculation day to day, or perhaps even meal to meal. Since, in spite of the considerable changes, he was still indisputably my cousin Dinius, it was to be supposed that once he had recognized me, there was little point in pretending he was wrong. I smiled, and held out my hand. "Welcome, Dinius. Yours is the first known face I've seen today." "What in the name of the gods are you doing here? Everyone said you were dead, but I didn't believe it." His big head thrust out, peering close as the quick eyes looked me up and down. "Wherever you were, you've done all right, seemingly. How long since you've been back?" "We came today." "Then you heard the news?" "I knew Camlac was dead. I'm sorry, if you are. As you'll know, he was no friend of mine. But that was hardly political." I paused, waiting. Let him make the moves. I saw from a corner of an eye that Caddo was tense and watchful, a hand still to his hip. I moved my own hand, palm down, in a slight flattening movement, and saw him relax. Dinius lifted a shoulder. "Camlac? He was a fool. I told him which way the wolf would jump." But as he spoke, I saw his eyes slide sideways towards the shadow. It seemed that men watched their tongues these days in Madadunham. His eyes came back to me, suspicious, wary. "What's your business here? Why have you come back?" "Well, to see my mother. I've been in Cornwall. All we got there was rumours of fighting. When I heard Camlac was dead, and Vortimer, I wondered what had happened at home." "Well, she's alive, you'll have found that out. The High King respects the church. I doubt you'll get to see her, though." "You're probably right. I went up to the nunnery, they wouldn't let me in. But I'll be here for a few days. I'll send a message in, see if she wants to see me. I imagine she'll find a way of doing so. But at least I know she's safe. It's a real stroke of luck running into you like this. You'll be able to give me the rest of the news. I had no idea what I might find here, so, as you see, I came in quietly, alone with my servant." Quietly's right. I thought you were thieves. You're lucky I didn't cut you down and ask questions afterwards. It was the old Dinius, the bullying note again, an immediate response to my mild, excusing tone. Well, I wasn't taking any risks till I knew how the family stood. I went off to St. Peter's. I waited till dusk to do that. Then I came back to take a look around. Is the place empty then? I'm still living here. Where else? The arrogance rang as hollow as the empty colonnade. For a moment I felt tempted to ask him for hospitality, see what he'd say. As if the thought had struck him at the same moment, he added quickly, Cornwall, eh? What's the news from there? They say Ambrosius's messengers are scuttling across the narrow sea like waterflies. I laughed. I wouldn't know. I've been leading a sheltered life. Yes, well, you picked the right place. The contempt that I remembered so well was back in his voice. They say old Gorlois spent the winter snuggled down in bed with a girl barely turned 20, and left the rest of the kings to play their own games out in the snow. They say she'd make Helen of Troy look like a market woman. What's she like? I never saw her. He's a jealous husband. Jealous of you? He laughed, and followed it with a comment that made Cadell behind me suck in his breath. But the jibe had put my cousin back in humour and off his guard. I was still the little bastard cousin, and of no account. Well, it would suit you. You had a peaceful winter, you with your goatish old duke, while the rest of us tramped the country after the Saxons. So he had fought with Camlac and Vortimer. It was what I had wanted to know. I was hardly responsible for the Duke's policy. Nor am I now. It's as well for you. You knew he was in the north with Vortigern, then? I knew he left to join him at Carnarvon, was it? Are you going up there yourself? I put the gentlest of queries into my voice, adding meekly, I wasn't really in a position to hear much news that mattered. A chilled current of air eddied, loaded with damp between the pillars. From some broken gutter above us, water suddenly spilled over to splash between us on the flagstones. I saw him gather his cloak around him. Why are we standing here? He spoke with a brisk heartiness that rang as false as the arrogance. Come and exchange news over a flask of wine, I hesitated, but only for a moment. It seemed obvious that Dinius had his own reasons for keeping out of the High King's eye. For one thing, if he'd managed to live down his association of Camlac, he would surely be with Vortigern's army, not skulking here in this threadbare fashion in an empty palace. For another, now that he knew I was in Maradunum, I preferred to keep him under my eye, and leave him now to go and talk to whom he wished. So I accepted, with every appearance of flattered pleasure, only insisting that he must join me for supper, if he could tell me where a good meal was to be found, and a warm seat out of the wet. Almost before the words were out, he had me by the arm and was hurrying me across the atrium and out through the street door. Fine, fine. There's a place over on the west side, beyond the bridge. The food's good. They get the kind of clients there that mind their own business, eh? Not that you'll be wanting to bother with a girl, eh? Though you don't look as if they'd made a clerk of you, after all. Never mind that for now. It doesn't do to look as though you've got too much to talk about these days. You either fall foul of the Welsh, or you'll fall foul of Vortigern. And the place is crawling with his spies just now. I don't know who it is they're looking for, but there's a story going about. No, take your trash away. This was to a beggar, who had thrust a tray of rough-cut stones and leather laces in front of us. The man moved back without a word. I saw that he was blind in one eye from a cut, a hideous scar that ran right up one cheek and had flattened the bridge of his nose. He looked as if it had been a sword cut. I dropped a coin on the tray as we passed, and Dinius shot me a look that was far from friendly. Times have changed, eh? You must have struck it rich in Cornwall. Tell me, what happened that night? Did you mean to set the whole damn place on fire? Well, I'll tell you all about it over supper. I would say no more till we reached the shelter of the tavern and got a bench in the corner with our backs to the wall.